They say every town has its secrets, but some towns are literally built on them. Picture this: a quiet, ordinary-looking road where on any given night, phantom headlights might suddenly rush towards you, or ghostly figures might tap on your car window, searching for something they lost long ago. This isn't just the start of a horror movie. This is Riverdale Road in Thornton, Colorado, and it's just one of many places all over the world where the past isn't just remembered. For some, it's re-experienced, relived by those who swear its echoes still walk among us. So what happens when the sheer weight of real history, often tragic and violent, gets so heavy it seems to crack the veil between then and now? What happens when that history creates actual ghosts? Hello there, seekers of the unseen and fellow students of the past. Today, we're heading into the heart of small towns. You know, those places often known for their tight-knit communities and picture-perfect main streets. But just beneath that charming surface, many of these towns hold a different kind of story. One told in whispers, chilling encounters, and legends that just refuse to die. And these aren't just spooky campfire tales. We're looking into the eerie and often compelling connection between real, documented historical events, actual tragedies, real people, genuine suffering, and the paranormal legends that have seemingly risen from their ashes. All across the globe, from quiet country lanes in England to the deep south of the United States, from old battlefields to forgotten plantations, the very ground in small towns often feels soaked in stories. Stories of lives cut short, of injustices never spoken of intense emotions that feel imprinted onto the place itself. This is the raw stuff ghost stories are made of. We're going to explore how brutal murders, devastating massacres, the horrors of war, and the unresolved pain of individuals can plant the seeds for these lasting ghostly tales. These legends, passed down through generations, often become more than just spooky fun. They become a part of the town's identity, a living testament to a past that just won't stay buried. We'll look at specific cases where the line between historical fact and paranormal folklore is hauntingly thin. We'll examine the actual events, the documented history, and then see how those truths have been woven into the spectral tales that define these places. Are these ghosts just the product of overactive imaginations and good old-fashioned storytelling? Or is there something more going on? Could it be that certain places, saturated by the intense energy of what happened there, genuinely hold onto echoes of the past? Join us as we try to uncover what happens when history itself becomes the most active creator of small-town ghosts. Before we jump into specific haunted spots, let's talk about the kind of ground these small-town ghost stories grow from. It's rarely random. The paranormal legends that stick around the longest, the ones people truly believe, are almost always tied to real, often traumatic historical events. The shadows of the past are long, and they have a chilling way of shaping the present, sometimes in ways we're only just starting to figure out. Tragic events are probably the biggest spark for paranormal legends. Just think about the sheer emotional power of a sudden violent death, a murder, an accident, a suicide. The shock, the grief, the terror. These intense human experiences, according to folklore and many who believe, can leave a kind of psychic stain on a location. Riverdale Road in Thornton, Colorado, for example, is infamous not just for one tragedy, but a whole string of them, including a chilling legend of a man who supposedly burned his family alive in their mansion. This kind of profound localized trauma becomes a magnet for unexplained happenings, a dark well that ghostly stories are drawn from for generations. The sheer horror of such events almost demands an explanation, and sometimes, the supernatural offers a way to understand the unthinkable. Historical figures, too, can become the ghostly heart of local lore. Often, these are people who suffered terribly, or maybe even caused great suffering themselves. The Bell Witch legend in Adams, Tennessee is a perfect example. This terrifying haunting, which absolutely tormented the Bell family in the early 19th century, is undeniably linked to a real neighbor, Kate Batts. Whether it was through a curse she supposedly uttered or some other dark connection, Batts became the face of this evil entity. Her historical presence gave a tangible human anchor to the inexplicable terror the Bells went through. When a community has a known person tied to strange events, the legend takes on a really disturbing layer of reality. Wartime and periods of intense political upheaval are also notorious for birthing ghosts. Battlefields, execution sites, and old prisons are just soaked in the extremes of human experience: fear, sacrifice, betrayal, and violent death. Sleepy Hollow, New York, is probably the most famous example. While Washington Irving's story of the Headless Horseman is fiction, it's deeply rooted in the real history of the American Revolution. The story of a Hessian soldier who lost his head to a cannonball was a local tale long before Irving wrote his famous story, a ghostly echo of the very real violence that swept through that area. The spectral riders and mournful ghosts of such places act as constant reminders of the conflicts that shaped the land. Massacres in times of deep social unrest are another dark source for paranormal activity. The Thibodaux Massacre of 1887 in Louisiana, where striking African-American sugarcane workers were brutally killed, is a horrific chapter in American history. The immense trauma and injustice of this event have fueled generations of ghost stories, especially around places like the Laurel Valley Plantation and local cemeteries. These aren't just vague fears. They're tied to the very real anguish of a community where the spirits of the wronged are said to still be looking for justice or peace. In this context, ghost stories can become a powerful form of remembrance, a way to make sure the silenced voices of the past are never truly forgotten. These historical events, filled with pain, injustice, and overwhelming emotion, don't just fade away into history books. In small towns, where the past often feels much more present and personal, they linger. They become part of the collective memory, the landscape, the very identity of the place. And sometimes, they show up as ghosts, tangible reminders that history, no matter how deeply you try to bury it, still has the power to reach out and touch us. Stretching for 11 infamous miles through Thornton, Colorado, Riverdale Road is much more than just a stretch of asphalt. It's a corridor of fear, a place where the veil between our world and the next seems incredibly thin. Its reputation as one of America's most haunted roads isn't built on just one spooky tale, but a whole chilling collection of them. Each one seems to grow out of a dark and often violent history that clings to the cottonwood, trees, and deserted stretches like a stubborn fog. The history of Riverdale Road is woven with threads of tragedy and alleged darkness. One of the biggest legends is about the Wolcott family and their grand mansion, which local lore says once stood proudly along the road. The story goes that the father, driven mad, set the mansion on fire, with his wife and children trapped inside, before killing himself. While the exact details of this event are fuzzy, people debate the fire's exact date, or if it even happened as told. The emotional fallout from such a horrific tale has undeniably stained the area. Adding to this grim foundation are whispers about the land's even earlier history, tales of it being used as slave territory, a place where unspeakable cruelties might have occurred, their echoes still bouncing through time. Some even claim witches were hanged along this road, their tormented spirits forever tied to the place of their death. Then there are the more recent, but just as tragic, events. Numerous fatal car accidents along its winding, poorly lit curves, adding fresh layers of sorrow to an already heavy landscape. From this grim soil of supposed historical events, so many ghostly legends have sprung up. The Gates of Hell is one of Riverdale's most notorious landmarks, a set of rusty iron gates, said to be the original entrance to the burned-out Wolcott mansion. Visitors say they feel an overwhelming sense of dread near these gates. Some even claim to see the ghostly figures of the doomed family, or hear their disembodied screams cutting through the quiet night. The ghost of the father, consumed by his murderous rage, is said to stalk the ruins, while the ghosts of his wife and children are seen fleeing in endless terror. But the Wolcotts aren't the only spirits said to haunt Riverdale. There's the phantom jogger, believed to be the ghost of a man tragically hit and killed by a car. Drivers report hearing eerie footsteps keeping pace with their cars, or feeling phantom taps and thuds on their doors, as if the ghostly runner is trying to get their attention, maybe looking for justice or a ride he'll never finish. Another common sight is the Lady in White, a classic ghostly figure seen wandering aimlessly along the roadside, often near the river or in the more desolate parts. She's usually described as searching for something or someone, a common theme in haunted places worldwide. But on Riverdale, she feels like she truly belongs among the other restless spirits. The legends don't stop there. People have reported phantom vehicles like a ghostly Camaro that tries to lure drivers into deadly races. Disembodied voices, cold spots, and that unsettling feeling of being watched are common experiences for anyone brave enough to drive the road after dark. Some even talk about seeing bodies hanging from the trees during a full moon, a chilling reminder of the darker, unverified rumors of lynchings and other violent acts. And then there are the demonic phantom dogs, their glowing eyes and guttural growls adding a truly primal terror to the mix. Even stories of ghostly children, perhaps linked to a rumored school bus crash or other forgotten tragedies, pop up from time to time, their small handprints appearing on car windows or their faint laughter carried on the wind. The sheer number of paranormal claims around Riverdale Road is pretty staggering. While law enforcement officials say they haven't found specific service calls directly linked to these urban legends, they do acknowledge the road's dangerous nature. Its many curves and poor lighting have led to plenty of real-world accidents. This actual danger perhaps just makes the eerie atmosphere feel even stronger. The fact that these stories keep being told, passed from generation to generation, keeps the legends alive. Locals share tales, teenagers dare each other to drive the road at midnight, and paranormal investigators flock to the site, hoping to catch evidence of its ghostly residents. The old cottonwood trees themselves, gnarled and ancient, seem to stand as silent witnesses to the countless stories, both real and rumored, that have played out beneath their branches. Riverdale Road is a powerful example of how a concentration of tragic events, whether fully documented or just part of folklore, can turn a simple stretch of pavement into a legendary haunted highway, a place where every shadow seems to hold a story and every unexplained noise could be a whisper from the other side. The weight of its supposed history means the ghosts of Riverdale Road will likely keep haunting the imaginations, and perhaps the reality of those who travel it for years to come. When it comes to American paranormal history, few cases are as chilling, as well documented, and as utterly baffling as the Bell Witch. For nearly 200 years, the story of the Bell family of Adams, Tennessee, and the evil entity that tormented them has both captivated and terrified anyone who hears it. This isn't just a simple ghost story. It's a complex saga filled with poltergeist activity, disembodied voices, physical attacks, and even an alleged murder, all centered around a very real family and rooted in the specific historical setting of the early 19th century American frontier. The historical story of the Bell Witch haunting starts in 1817 on the farm of John Bell Sr., a well-off farmer and an elder in the Red River Baptist Church in Robertson County, Tennessee. By all accounts, the Bell family was ordinary and respected. John Bell, his wife Lucy, and their several children lived a life pretty typical for settlers in that region. But this normal life was shattered when bizarre and increasingly terrifying things started happening. It reportedly began quietly, strange knocking sounds on the outside walls of their log cabin, the sounds of gnawing on bedposts, and chains being dragged across the wooden floors. At first, John Bell tried to keep these things secret, probably fearing people would make fun of him. But as the activity got worse, secrecy became impossible. The entity, which eventually started speaking and identified itself as Kate, supposedly after a local woman named Kate Batts, with whom John Bell had apparently had a difficult business dealing, began to focus its anger on John Bell Sr. and his youngest daughter, Elizabeth, known as Betsy. Kate Batts was a real person, a neighbor some described as eccentric, and many in the community suspected her of practicing witchcraft, though this was never proven. The legend suggests Batts felt cheated by John Bell in a land deal and put a curse on him and his family. Whether Batts herself was supernaturally responsible, or the entity just used her name, her real-life existence gave the community's fear and guesswork a tangible focus. The full-blown legend developed quickly and terrifyingly. Kate was not a shy spirit. She spoke, often in different voices, sometimes quoting Bible verses perfectly, then suddenly swearing up a storm. She sang hymns and rude songs with equal energy. The entity was reportedly able to hold intelligent conversations with visitors, showing knowledge of events and family histories happening miles away. Eyewitness accounts, including those put together in an 1894 book by Martin Van Buren Ingram, called An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch, describe a relentless campaign of terror. Betsy Bell suffered the most obvious physical abuse. She was slapped, pinched, her hair was pulled, and she would often faint or go into convulsions. The entity seemed especially determined to stop Betsy's marriage to a local young man named Joshua Gardner, tormenting the couple whenever they were together. John Bell Sr. also suffered severe physical problems attributed to Kate. He had facial seizures, trouble swallowing, and his health generally declined. The entity openly said it intended to kill him. The fame of the Bell Witch haunting spread far beyond Robertson County. People traveled hundreds of miles to witness what was happening. Perhaps the most famous alleged visitor was General Andrew Jackson, before he became president. According to legend, Jackson and his men, curious about the stories, came to investigate. The tale goes that their wagon got inexplicably stuck, and after a lot of effort, a disembodied voice announced it would let them pass if Jackson agreed Kate was the most powerful being there. Jackson supposedly later said he would rather face the entire British Army than encounter the Bell Witch again. While there's no solid historical proof of Jackson's visit, the story has become a key part of the legend, cementing its place in American folklore. The Bell Witch legend was kept alive by word of mouth for decades before Ingram's book brought it to a wider audience. The entity reportedly tormented John Bell Sr. until his death in December 1820. His death was mysterious. He fell into a stupor, and a strange vial of dark liquid was found near his bed. Kate allegedly claimed responsibility, boasting that she had given him a dose from the vial. After John Bell's death and Betsy Bell later breaking off her engagement to Joshua Gardner, the entity's activity reportedly calmed down, though it promised to return in 7 years, and then again in 107 years. Some accounts claim it did return in 1828, visiting John Bell Jr. for a few weeks, apparently offering insights into the spirit world. A later return in 1935 is also part of some versions of the story. The Bell Witch story has stuck around for so many reasons. The sheer amount of alleged eyewitness testimony, the specific details of the claims, and the connection to real, identifiable people and places give it a chilling sense of reality. The story has been the subject of numerous books, articles, documentaries, and even movies, each retelling and sometimes adding to the tale. More recently, some researchers, like chemistry professor Megan Mann, have suggested John Bell might have died from arsenic poisoning, possibly given by a family member or a slave, and that some of the magical happenings could have chemical explanations. However, these rational explanations, while they might explain certain things, struggle to cover the full range of reported paranormal activity, especially the intelligent, talking entity. The Bell Witch Cave on the former Bell property is now a tourist attraction, drawing people curious to connect with this dark piece of Tennessee history. The legend continues to be a subject of serious paranormal investigation and skeptical questions alike, proving that the mysteries from the Bell Farm over 200 years ago are far from solved. The Bell Witch remains one of America's most compelling and disturbing historical hauntings, a stark reminder that sometimes the deepest horrors aren't found in fiction, but in the recorded experiences of those who lived before us. Nestled along the Hudson River, the village of Sleepy Hollow, New York, is a name that instantly brings to mind American folklore and the ultimate Halloween ghost story. Its star phantom, the terrifying Headless Horseman, has galloped through the nightmares of generations. But this iconic tale, made famous by Washington Irving in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, isn't just something one author dreamed up. It's deeply connected with the very real, very bloody history of the American Revolutionary War, a conflict that left a lasting mark on this small town and the lands around it. The historical stage for Sleepy Hollow's ghostly legends was set during the chaotic years of the American Revolution. Westchester County, where Sleepy Hollow, which was actually called North Tarrytown until its official name change in 1996 or 1997 to cash in on its literary fame, is located, was a fiercely fought-over neutral ground between British-occupied New York City and the American-controlled lands to the north. This area was plagued by raiding parties, skirmishes, and the constant fear of war. The local people, made up of Dutch settlers and others, lived in a constant state of anxiety. One of the most important historical events directly linked to the Headless Horseman legend is the Battle of White Plains, which happened in October 1776, not far from Sleepy Hollow. During this battle, Hessian soldiers, German mercenaries hired by the British, were heavily involved. These Hessians were known for their fierceness and were deeply feared by the colonial population. Historical accounts, including the memoirs of Major General William Heath, published in 1798, mention that during fighting near White Plains on November 1, 1776, a shot from the American cannon at this place took off the head of a Hessian artilleryman. This gruesome historical detail is widely believed to be the spark of truth from which the legend of the Headless Horseman grew. Local stories about a decapitated Hessian soldier haunting the area, searching for his lost head, likely existed before Irving's 1820 story. Irving himself, who spent time in the Tarrytown area as a teenager, would have heard these local ghost stories. Irving's genius was to take this existing folklore and weave it into such a gripping story. In the legend of Sleepy Hollow, the horseman is described as the ghost of a Hessian trooper, whose head had been carried off by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War. He's said to ride out nightly from his burial place in the old Dutch church burying ground, looking for his head, or, if he can't find it, to take someone else's. This image of a relentless ghostly pursuer became an instant American classic. While Irving's Ichabod Crane might have just encountered a prankster dressed as the horseman, the underlying fear and the historical connection were very real. But the Headless Horseman isn't the only ghost said to haunt Sleepy Hollow. The region's revolutionary past has created other spectral figures. Major John Andre, a British spy involved in Benedict Arnold's plot to surrender West Point to the British, was captured in Tarrytown in 1780 and later hanged. Patriots Park in Tarrytown, near where he was captured, is said to be haunted by Andre's restless spirit. His tragic end, a young and cultured officer meeting a spy's shameful death, left a strong impression and fueled local tales of his lingering presence. The Sleepy Hollow Cemetery itself, right next to the old Dutch church burying ground, is a huge, historic site that holds the graves of many notable figures, including Washington Irving himself. Many consider it one of the most haunted cemeteries in America, with countless reports of apparitions, disembodied voices, and unexplained happenings, many of which are anecdotally tied to its Revolutionary-era burials and the general weight of its long history. The legend of the Headless Horseman and other Sleepy Hollow ghosts have been kept alive by more than just Irving's story. The tale struck a chord because it tapped into real historical trauma and fears. The image of the decapitated soldier was a powerful symbol of the brutality and dehumanization of war. The story has been retold and reinterpreted in countless films, television shows, and stage productions, each version keeping the legend alive for new audiences. The town of Sleepy Hollow itself actively embraces its haunted heritage, especially around Halloween, drawing tourists from all over the world eager to experience the thrill of the legend in its actual setting. The fact these tales last so long really shows how historical events can create powerful and enduring folklore. The Headless Horseman is more than just a monster. He's an echo of colonial violence, a reminder of a past that refuses to stay buried. Franz Potter, a professor who specializes in Gothic studies, notes that the Headless Horseman, as a supernatural entity, represents a past that never dies, but always haunts the living. The real battles fought, the real soldiers who died, the real spies who were executed, these historical facts provide the solid foundation upon which the ghostly legends of Sleepy Hollow are built. The lingering question, as historian Elizabeth Bradley put it, is whether these tales endure, because they remind us that there are still American mysteries and half-truths that may never be fully known. And that, perhaps, is the whole point. Sleepy Hollow remains a powerful testament to how a community can become so deeply intertwined with its historical specters, their stories woven into the very identity of the place. In the heart of Louisiana's sugar country, the town of Thibodaux carries a dark and often hushed-up historical burden. The Thibodaux Massacre of 1887. This horrific event, largely wiped from mainstream history books for generations, saw the brutal killing of dozens of African-American sugarcane workers who dared to go on strike for better wages and conditions. The profound trauma and injustice of this massacre have seeped into the local folklore, fueling persistent tales of hauntings at sites connected to this painful past. A grim reminder that history, especially when marked by violence and oppression, rarely stays silent. The historical situation leading up to the Thibodaux Massacre is rooted in the post-Reconstruction South. Even years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the lives of African-American laborers in Louisiana's sugar parishes were barely any different from slavery. They lived in former slave cabins, worked in gangs under brutal conditions, and were paid pitifully low wages, often in scrip that could only be used at plantation stores with jacked-up prices. In late 1887, desperate to improve their lives, thousands of sugar workers, both black and white, organized under the Knights of Labor and went on strike during the critical harvest season. They demanded fair wages paid in actual money, an end to the scrip system, and better working conditions. The response from the powerful white sugar planters was swift and brutal. They refused to negotiate, kicked striking workers and their families out of their homes, and called on Louisiana Governor Samuel D. McHenry to send in the state militia to break the strike. Tensions skyrocketed. Newspapers at the time, largely taking the planters' side, fanned the flames of racial fear, falsely reporting incidents of black-on-white violence and painting the strikers as dangerous rebels. Thibodaux, the main town in Lafourche Parish, became the center of the conflict, as many evicted workers tried to find refuge there. The birth of the legend, or rather, the horrific reality that would become a haunting memory, happened on November 23, 1887. After two white pickets who were enforcing a town lockdown were allegedly shot and wounded by unknown people, white vigilante groups, backed by the militia, unleashed a reign of terror on the black community of Thibodaux. Over the next few hours, these armed mobs went on a killing spree. They dragged unarmed black men, women, and children from their homes, shooting them in the streets. Some were forced to run for their lives before being gunned down. An eyewitness reported that no less than 35 Negroes were killed outright, including the elderly and the young. Other estimates say the death toll was as high as 60 or more. The bodies of the victims were reportedly dumped unceremoniously into a mass grave, a site that in later decades was said to have become the town's dump. The strike was brutally crushed, and unionized farm labor in the southern sugar industry was effectively silenced for decades. The Thibodaux Massacre was a calculated act of terror designed to maintain a system of racial and economic control. For many years, the event was actively suppressed, a forgotten and buried piece of history. However, within the African American community, the oral history of the massacre lived on, passed down through generations, a whispered testament to the lives lost and the terror endured. It's from this deep well of collective trauma that the paranormal legends have risen. Stories of hauntings are particularly linked to locations tied to the sugar industry and the massacre. Plantations in the region, like Laurel Valley Plantation, though its specific involvement in the 1887 events is part of broader regional lore rather than a direct accusation in readily available snippets, are often mentioned in local ghost stories as sites of restless spirits. St. John's Historic Cemetery in Thibodaux and other burial grounds where victims might have been buried are also described as places where ghostly encounters happen. Visitors and locals have reported seeing apparitions, hearing disembodied moans and cries, and feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness and oppression in these areas. These aren't the playful spirits of folklore. They're described as sorrowful, restless, their presence a tangible echo of the violence and injustice they suffered. The effort to bring the Thibodaux Massacre into the light of historical recognition has been a long and difficult one, with recent works like John DeSantis's book, The Thibodaux Massacre, Racial Violence, and the 1887 sugar cane labor strike playing a huge role. As the historical facts become more widely known, there's a growing movement to properly memorialize the victims and acknowledge this dark chapter. This includes efforts like using ground-penetrating radar at potential mass grave sites, hoping to provide a proper burial and, perhaps, some measure of peace for the dead. The ghostly legends tied to the Thibodaux Massacre serve as a sobering example of how profound historical trauma can show up as paranormal folklore. The Rev. Nelson Dan Taylor, Sr., a pastor and civil rights lawyer in Thibodaux, has spoken of the massacre as an act of suppression and terror whose effects still ripple through the community. The stories of restless spirits are, in a way, a continuation of that ripple, a refusal of the past to be completely silenced. They represent the lingering pain, the unaddressed injustices, and the collective memory of an atrocity. In Thibodaux, the whispers of ghosts are deeply connected to the silenced cries of history, a haunting testament to the lives that were so brutally cut short, and a reminder that the fight for remembrance and justice is far from over. The tales we've explored, from the blood-soaked ground of Riverdale Road to the revolutionary echoes of Sleepy Hollow, are more than just chilling stories. They represent a fascinating mix of history, human psychology, and the enduring power of storytelling. But why do these legends of small-town ghosts stick around for so long, often for centuries? The answers have a lot to do with how communities process trauma, the strength of oral tradition, and the very real connection to the past that these stories provide. One big reason these paranormal legends last is that they help communities deal with trauma together. Traumatic events, especially those involving sudden death, violence, or deep injustice, leave deep scars on a community. Ghost stories can pop up as a way to tell the story, a way for people to make sense of things they can't explain, to give form to their fears, and to wrestle with loss and suffering. The ghost becomes a symbol of what's unresolved, the unhealed wound in the town's history. For example, the tales of restless spirits in Thibodaux can be seen as a way the community, particularly those whose ancestors were victims, keeps the memory of the 1887 massacre alive, making sure the injustice isn't forgotten, even when official histories tried to wipe it away. Belief in the paranormal has been linked to a history of trauma, and vague or threatening environments, common in these stories, are more likely to trigger such experiences. Small towns, just by being small towns, often have strong oral traditions. Stories are passed down from parent to child, from neighbor to neighbor, around dinner tables, and yes, campfires. Each retelling can subtly shape and add to the legend, fitting it to modern worries while keeping its core historical connection. This living, breathing nature of folklore makes sure the stories stay relevant and hit home across generations. The Bell Witch legend, for example, was an oral tradition for decades before it was widely published, its power growing with each personal account and community retelling. This shared storytelling builds a sense of community identity and a collective memory that ties residents to their town's unique and sometimes unsettling past. Also, the physical leftovers of the past play a huge role in keeping these ghost stories alive. Many legends are deeply connected to specific locations: an old, decaying mansion, a lonely stretch of road, an ancient cemetery, or a historic battlefield. These tangible landmarks act as constant, physical reminders of the historical events that supposedly sparked the hauntings. When you can walk the same paths as the historical figures, stand on the ground where tragedy struck, or see the crumbling foundations of a house with a dark past, the stories feel incredibly real and immediate. The gates of hell on Riverdale Road, or the old Dutch church burying ground in Sleepy Hollow, aren't just settings. They're almost characters themselves, silent witnesses that anchor the supernatural tales to the physical world. Our brains are also wired to interpret ambiguous things: a cold spot, a creaking floorboard, an odd shadow, in line with what we already believe and expect, especially in places already labeled haunted or threatening. Finally, these stories often tap into universal human themes: fear of death, the desire for justice, the possibility of an afterlife, and the feeling that the past is never truly gone. They explore what happens when life is unfairly cut short, or when great wrongs go unpunished. Ghost stories can give a voice to the voiceless, particularly for marginalized groups whose histories may have been ignored or suppressed by official records. The tales of enslaved spirits or victims of massacres ensure that their suffering is remembered, their stories told, even if it's through the chilling medium of a ghost story. So what it all boils down to is that small-town ghost stories are a complex mix of historical fact, folklore, psychological need, and our enduring human fascination with the unknown. They show us that the past isn't some static, distant thing, but a dynamic presence that continues to shape our landscapes, our communities, and our deepest fears. These shadows linger because they tell us something vital about who we were, and perhaps about what parts of us stay tied to the places history has touched. We've explored some pretty haunted small towns, and if there's one thing we've learned, it's that history doesn't always stay in the past. From the vengeful whispers on Riverdale Road, to the relentless terror of the Bell Witch, from the Headless Horseman's revolutionary ride in Sleepy Hollow to the sorrowful echoes of the Thibodaux Massacre, we've seen how real documented events, tragedies, injustices, and violent deaths can become fertile ground for paranormal legends. These stories, born from the very real pain and turmoil of people who lived before us, are more than just spooky entertainment. They're a form of collective memory, a way for communities to process trauma, to remember the forgotten, and to put words to the unspeakable. The ghostly figures that pop up are often powerful symbols of unresolved issues, of lives cut short, and of a past that refuses to be silenced. They are the echoes of history, bouncing through the landscapes and the minds of people in these small towns. The fact that these tales stick around, passed down through word of mouth and anchored by physical landmarks, speaks to a deep human need to connect with what came before, and to recognize how much historical events shape the places we call home. Whether you believe ghosts are real or see these legends as powerful metaphors, you can't deny their significance. They challenge us to look closer at the stories embedded in our own communities, to listen to the whispers of the past, and to think about the ways history keeps shaping our present. The true stories behind these small-town ghosts remind us that the veil between then and now can be terrifyingly thin, and that sometimes the most haunted places are those most deeply steeped in real human history. What are your thoughts? Do you know of a small town with its own haunting history? Share your stories and theories in the comments below. We genuinely love to hear them. And if you found this trip into the shadows as captivating as we did, please give this video a like, share it with your fellow history and paranormal fans, and don't forget to subscribe for more explorations into the world's most intriguing mysteries. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and perhaps keep a watchful eye on those shadows.